CTBK gives executives and owners of mid-market businesses unparalleled confidence and clarity so you can focus on strategic objectives and organizational success. Their multidisciplinary advisors, accountants, and team members have a wealth of experience and are all available and responsive to each client to ensure the most effective advice, actions, and outcomes no matter the situation or complexity level. That experience base and one-team approach, combined with integrated and efficient way of operating, enable them to be truly proactive partners, doing the best thing for their client every time. Visit ctbk.com or call 716-630-2400 to learn how CTBK can work for you.
You are hate listening to Tim Graham and Friends.
It's a 716 day edition of Tim Graham and Friends, brought to you by CTBK, CPAs and Business Consultants. I'm Tim Graham of The Athletic, here with Jonah Bronstein of Bronstein Sports Plus, and he's wearing pink because it is 716 day. He does work with Men Wear Pink. And Jonah, how are you celebrating your 716 day?
By displaying my pink spirit, which is a classic color of Western New York and Buffalo-based sports. As far as 716 Day, it goes back into the lore in Buffalo history. I feel like it's only been celebrated the last 3, 4, 5 years or so, and I used to have more of a cynical mindset about it. That I'm not aware of another town in the country or another city in the country that celebrates a date that happens to coincide with its area code. I mean, I tweeted yesterday, happy 715 day to the fine folks in northern Wisconsin. But I did a quick search and didn't find other happy 715 day posts. So it's not really capturing the culture up there in some other area codes. But I've come around a little bit. I think maybe the uniqueness of it, that Buffalo might be the only place that does that. And then the altruistic spirit of Bills and Sabres sports fans, and how the Bills and Sabres organizations have sort of turned this into a giving day. And I think that's, a good thing to lean into that vein of philanthropy that Bills fans and Sabres fans like to display, and being involved with the Men Wear Pink cause the past year or so, and American Cancer Society being linked with Give 716. I've caught the 716 day spirit, and I'm no longer cynical about it at all.
Well, good for you, Jonah. You've been really involved in it, and for the last 2 years, like really throwing yourself into it, holding different events. We might be holding an event here in the near future. We'll talk more about that as the time goes on. Las Vegas was like that with the Corporate Challenge. Corporate Challenge is just a race in most cities. When I lived out in Las Vegas, and I haven't come across it anywhere since, I don't know if they still do it, but their Corporate Challenge was like an Olympics, and all the companies competed against each other. And we were urged at the Las Vegas Sun to sign up for as many events as you can, because you get points for participating in the event. You don't have to win, but then if you medal, then you got more points. And I don't know how it worked out, but I was much younger then, so I was in a few events. But yeah, it's just different than. It's weird how different cities do things differently under the same umbrella.
Can you remember how many years it's been? Because 716 Day wasn't always a thing. I don't remember it growing up. I don't think.
No, you know what I remember is probably in like the, I don't know, 2010 or so. Maybe a little bit before then. I mean, I'm taking a stab at it, but 716 became a thing. Like somebody just decided, 716 just kind of became a thing of pride, or your area code. I think maybe it started in, music, right? Rap songs. You'd mention your area code as where you were from. It was a quick way to do it. And I'm not saying, and then eventually people started doing 716. People were getting married on 716 because Buffalo is your identity in some ways. So people, 716 would become popular for different dates on things. But, I recall there becoming a rash of people who were just had to get married on July 16th because they loved Buffalo so much. And then I think 716 Day, well, the name of the bar outside the arena was 716. So it was a brand. It was, somebody went through market research to decide 716 is a cool thing to call your town. And we see it on alternate NBA jerseys, Major League Baseball jerseys, right? I mean, we see that's the thing. And so, yeah, I think it just kind of came organically from that as an event. It's pretty cool. I mean, it makes sense. And it's just a different way to show your local pride.
Do we think Bills fans from Rochester, Southern Ontario, Northern Pennsylvania, Western Pennsylvania, that aren't in the 716 area code, do they participate in this? Do they feel left out? Is it, are you a 716er, even if that's not the 3 numbers at the beginning of your phone number?
Yeah, I think so. Well, that's the other thing that's kind of unusual about Buffalo. It's a bigger city that doesn't have multiple area codes. Cleveland has had 330 and 216 for 30 years.
That sounds like a ludicrous song.
What's
you
that?
Heard that song, Hoes in Different Area Codes?
Oh,
and then he starts just going numbers.
Right. There was a Seinfeld episode about this back in the 90s where you had a different area code in New York City. And if you got the different area code, you were looked down upon as a lesser than because you didn't have a 212 anymore. So Buffalo has avoided that because of the population, and it's kind of stayed the same. And
for now, I'm going to look for this story by F of the show, Nick Veronica wrote for WIVB.com that Buffalo might be getting a second area code someday soon.
And the reason you needed multiple area codes, I guess, wasn't just population. It was the proliferation of online. People had the second phone line. They needed a second phone line in their home so they could get online. They had their hard line for their home phone, and then they needed to get online, and then the cell phone. And so now every person or every household had 3 phone numbers instead of just one. And then, of course, now the online part has been eliminated, but in cell phones, there's more of people don't have hard lines. So maybe the need for phone numbers isn't as great. They went from 1-800 was the toll-free number to now there's 888 and 877, and there's all kinds of different free numbers because businesses were adding that. They ran out of numbers, but not in Western New York. 716 goes all the way down to Jamestown, right?
It does, although there's talk that, as WIVB has reported, that 624 could be introduced as a second area code sometime soon if they need more numbers. That would be June 24th, which is also Saint Jean Baptiste Day, Farmer Day, Fix Your Windows and Doors Day.
Oh, what's 716 Day? What is July 16th?
Let's say, I should say another F of the show, Tim Schmidt, my former editor at Tonawanda News, Niagara Gazette, and now Golf Week editor. It's his birthday. And I think he's one of the people that had mentioned he only heard a 716 Day about 2-3 years ago. National Hot Dog Day today. Oh, I think they gave away free hot dogs at Salem Field today to celebrate 716 Day and National Hot Dog Day.
That's
National
a big double dip for the
Fritters Day.
I'm sorry, I spoke over you. What was that?
National Corn Fritters Day. Actually, this is what I think you're celebrating today. Artificial Intelligence Appreciation Day.
Oh, we missed it. We should have saved my thoughts on artificial intelligence. I was just having a text exchange right before we came on with another F of the show, Jeff Glore, regarding AI. And he obviously missed the recent podcast in which I bemoaned how awful it is because he asked me what I thought of it. I should just send him a link to the podcast.
World Snake Day. That's all around the world. Take Your Poet to Work Day.
Not in Ireland, I'll bet, though.
No, you don't think so?
No snakes in Ireland.
Oh, I didn't know
Patrick drove them all away.
It's Fresh Spinach Day, National Cherry Day, and National Hot Dog Day, and National Corn Fritters Day. Can you put a meal together with all 4 of those things? Cherries, spinach, hot dogs, and corn fritters?
I think that maybe not a meal with everything on your plate, but you could have a guest list that is eclectic with that. You could serve those things and be a good host to any number of people who live different lifestyles. Big Popeye Day.
Guinea Pig Appreciation Day.
Although Popeye always ate it out of a can.
Yep, not Fresh Spinach Day, right?
Sabre schedule came out today. That's another big holiday. What were your Let me ask you this. Sabres schedule being released in it as a noteworthy thing. How significant is that in the entire Sabres offseason? Where would you rank the Sabres schedule being released versus anything else that has happened for the Sabres this offseason?
Well, I think I'd look at it first in the context of how less important it is than NFL schedule release. And there's no real countdown to the day. I think some of us that cover the NHL knew it was coming today, but there wasn't really a fan anticipation for this being the day. And all day long of leaks, the Sabres announced their home opener about an hour and a half before the full schedule came out. It's
I'll
not
say this,
nearly
Jonah,
the same event.
for people who cover the NHL, I think that things like this get buried because everybody wants to go on a vacation, right? The NHL crams so much stuff at the end of the season. You have obviously the Stanley Cup playoffs leading with the big moment of raising the Stanley Cup. And then it goes right into free agency, right into the draft, right into it's just one thing after another. People are development camps and prospect tournaments. And it's just at some point, if you're covering this league or even if you follow the league, you're like, I need to check out for a little bit. So go ahead and release your schedule. Whereas the NFL leaves these little carrots. It's like the putting the ET, getting the little Reese's Pieces. Like they leave you a trail through the offseason in the NFL. Whereas the NHL is like, all right, we're just going to empty everything onto your laps right now before we can, get away and you start paying attention to the National Football League. Because once the NFL starts up, nobody's going to give a shit about us at all.
Yeah, and you got NFL players on the Today Show and 2-hour long specials on different networks introducing all these games. Now there's more television partners, and obviously NFL scheduling and television events are a bigger deal, but it does seem like the NFL also does better marketing to amplify their schedule release and schedule unveiling, and the NFL or the NHL, just like the NBA, I think does, just drops the schedule on a day and lets you digest it, which is, I remember when the NFL schedule used to be like that and kind of wish it was still like that a little bit. Let the schedule come out and then you can analyze it. Schedule predictions and pre-analysis and assuming the Bills, for example, are going to play all these international games or picking out the primetime games. I guess we don't know all the television assignments for all of the NHL games now, so there's a little less to dissect. It's really just the games. In a way, I wonder if the NHL, because in the past they've put out the schedule closer to that, closer to July 1st, closer to the start of free agency and the draft and that week when it feels like all of the NHL offseason is happening at one time. Now it feels like the NHL offseason happened. Everybody went on break, went on vacation, and came back with the schedule a couple weeks later. And people are sort of like, yeah, well, see you in September, see you in October, and a little less interested in, when these games are going to be played and who and when and why. But I think there's some interest from Sabres fans and definitely us in the media when you look at how it aligns against the Bills schedule or the UB football and basketball schedule and see doubleheader dates, or I didn't see any on the schedule just at first glance, but if the Sabres are playing in a city the same night or the night before, the Bills play in that city and you can double dip that road trip. People like to look for those.
You wrote the story for WIVB.com. What was your lead on the Sabres schedule story?
Home opener. I think that's when people want to know, when's that first home game? When does the season start? And then that's segged into 10 of the first 15 games at home. It's probably good for this team. Last year they opened the season in Prague, or they played an exhibition game in Prague, and then they played an exhibition game in Germany, regular season games in Prague, and got off to a slow start with that traveling and losing those games. And they came home and were a bit sluggish and lost some more. They had a truncated training camp. Now this year they're going to have a more normal traditional training camp and preseason without the overseas travel, and then playing 10 of the first 15 games at home. And I think 4 or 5 or 4 or 6 right there at the start. Maybe they can get off to a better start. Maybe they can get in that playoff hunt earlier and on a roll. And if they don't, the way the schedule is going to catch up with them later on in December and January, if they're not in a playoff position after those 15 games, we might know pretty early whether this playoff drought's going to continue.
Where is the big road crunch? Because if you do have a home benefit early in the season, then there comes, a bill to be paid when it comes to the road games. Where obviously you get the Sabres after dark stretch adds to that. But is there where else is there a hazard or danger ahead when it comes to the road?
Yeah, December. They have their longest road trip of the season, 6 games from December 3rd through the 14th. And with some days off in and around that, that's, from the 2nd to the 17th without playing any home games. They only have 4 home games in December because they have another 4 road games coming up later in the month. So that's where they catch up with that long road trip. They start in Philly, then they go out west for 5 games there. Won't play too many home games, won't play many home games over the holiday weeks, really just once in the Christmas and New Year week schedule. So from the start of December into the first week of January, there's only 4 home games there, and there's 10 road games. So they're, that 10 of 15 catches up with them right after Thanksgiving, the week after Thanksgiving, when they'll be playing a lot of those early games kind of going into Thanksgiving, late November.
Quick programming note, which I should have mentioned off the top. We're going to be joined in a bit by Florina Altshiler, and she's been on the show a number of times to talk about sexual assault cases, domestic violence accusations as they've pertained to Buffalo Bills players in the past. And she's going to break down the Maxwell Hairston lawsuit, the Bills' first-round draft pick, the cornerback out of the University of Kentucky, who was accused of sexual assault while still a minor. He had just enrolled at UK as an early enrollee, so he was 17 years old at the time. And this is reported out and at the time of the draft, but the accuser has since filed a lawsuit. And Florina Altshiler is going to break down the timing of the lawsuit, why it's significant, if there's any significance at all, what this means for Maxwell Hairston from a legal standpoint. So I should have mentioned that off the top. Regarding the winter schedule, I guess you have some other insight regarding things that may or may not be happening this winter at the arena.
Well, yeah, within waiting for the schedule for the Sabres, talking to some different people that I know in the basketball community, because, there's some dates going on. There's NCAA tournament being played in March at KeyBank Center. Learned a little bit of basketball scheduling news as to what is and isn't going on there basketball wise. I've learned that Syracuse, they're finalizing this deal. The ink isn't dry yet, but Syracuse will be playing a men's basketball exhibition game against UB at the arena on October 25th. It's the night after the Sabres play the Toronto Maple Leafs at home, and then Sabres will be playing in Toronto that night. And there won't be another game during the regular season. There won't be the doubleheader that's happened often during NCAA tournament years involving Canisius and Niagara, UB and Bana. That was the original plan, that UB would play Canisius, Bana would play Niagara. Bana ended up getting, a better opportunity to play down in Fort Myers against North Carolina and some other really good teams that weekend. They pulled out. There was some negotiations to try to find a 4th team and make that work, but it didn't happen. And I'm told there won't be Big 4 games there in November.
That traditionally is an NCAA requirement to have games on that court during the season if you are going to host the NCAA tournament.
Yes, it is. And it's on paper that way. But and I don't have an official statement from the NCAA or the MAC or anybody involved. And, the schedules aren't released yet. So this doubleheader or something involving Canisius Niagara could still get put onto the schedule at a later date. That November 29th, Saturday after Thanksgiving, is still open as far as the Sabres schedule. So that date could still host some basketball games. Sabres are on the road that night. But I'm told
put Damon in there.
Damon would have played in that event. And if it comes back, Damon will probably play in that event, but Damon doesn't drive the scheduling of that. I mean, yeah, Damon against Niagara. Let's see, that would be fine. Because I think Canisius and Bonaventure, as far as I know, were on schedule to play, or Canisius and UB were on schedule to play that first game, and it was the Niagara-Bona game that fell apart first and put some things down. I don't know if they think they can sell the tickets without Bonaventure, without another marquee opponent, because I think the ideal would maybe be two local teams playing each other and then a big opponent, a Syracuse type opponent coming in for that. I think Damon could very well be involved in this event with UB and Syracuse. They played exhibition games against both of those teams several times over the years. They won't be playing against one of them, but I could see Damon playing some kind of opponent in that game. And from what I told, to get back to what you mentioned, from what I was told is that the NCAA has given its blessing, or the MAC has received the blessing to still host the NCAA tournament without playing this regular season date. It's been used as a site visit, and the NCAA tries out different game operations, things that they're going to need to do in March. But having been here so many times over the years, I don't think it was deemed that was necessary. And from what I was told, the NCAA hasn't even really attended these past regular season games for a time or two. They know what they have here in Buffalo for the games in March, and haven't found it necessary to go through that dry run in November again and again in order to continue hosting games here in March.
It wasn't that long ago. Again, I'm getting older, and as I guess my memories are, especially with me and the times I've moved for work, I still view Buffalo and moving here in 2000 as a relatively recent thing in my life, but it's not. It was 25 years ago. And I've now lived in Buffalo longer than I've lived anywhere in my life, including where I grew up in Ohio. But it seemed like when I moved here, there were college games played there, and it didn't have to be a local team, right? I mean, didn't they used to have, maybe like Cleveland State? I mean, it didn't have to be, they would market, they would promote games. They would actually have somebody on the arena staff. And I think, some like Silcott and maybe Reggie Witherspoon and Kevin Sylvester at one point, and they would actually stage events. Do you know the background on how that fell apart?
Well, I know the broad strokes of it. Yes, I do. I reported on this as it was falling apart about 20 years ago, and over the years, kind of talked to more people. And, what happened was the arena opened in 1996, and there was a strong tradition of playing basketball games at the Odd, going back to the 50s, 60s, and 70s, and even into the 80s and 90s. And there was a push from Larry Quinn helping to get that arena built, and then working for the Sabres and, ownership to continue that and to have basketball. And part of that was to attract the NCAA tournament, which came here in 2000. And prior to that, they would host major teams. They hosted Kentucky during its national championship season, and Syracuse played here a couple times. And there were a lot of Canisius and Niagara games, and that Big Four doubleheader happened every year. And that was just part of the basketball attractions at the arena. And there was better attendance. There was a belief by local basketball fans that you had to attend those games and buy tickets to those games in order to get your tickets and get good seats for the NCAA tournament coming in 2000. And later, I think they came back in 2004. I think local fans caught on after a while that going to the regular season games wasn't a prerequisite for being able to get tickets for the NCAA tournament games. The NCAA tournament games have continued to come here every 4 or 5 years or so and draw good crowds, but the regular season games were drawing smaller and smaller crowds as the years went along. Golisano sold the team. Larry Quinn was no longer involved. Reggie Witherspoon, who was involved in booking those games and finding the major teams that were willing to come here, they got paid, but were willing to take some money to play here. First of all, the prices for getting teams like Kentucky and Syracuse to come play in Buffalo got higher and higher, and the market really would only show up for Syracuse and certain high level top 10 teams. I think I remember one year West Virginia came here. They were borderline top 25. It was booked when John Beeline was the coach, but he had since moved on to Michigan, and Bob Huggins was the coach. And, that's a good team, and a team. Bob Huggins has taken West Virginia, I think, to the Final Four, but wasn't as attractive as Syracuse or a top 10 team, or John Beeline being the coach, and the crowd there was a little bit disappointing, and it was harder and harder to make money. And I know over recent years, as they've played Big Four doubleheaders, there's been disappointment in the crowds, and not really a profitable experience for the teams involved in the arena. I think it's unfortunate for the basketball fans. I think there's ways to maybe recapture that enthusiasm. It probably isn't playing, Canisius against UB and Bonaventure against Niagara year after year. There might be different ways you got to mix up the matchups, or do a multi-team exempt event, put up some money to bring some teams in. It might take some sponsorship and financial backing that could stand to lose some money, a bit of a loss leader at the start, or the Pagula operation just wanting to put some money into bringing in basketball programming, NBA preseason games, putting stuff like that together, putting some banners up into the rafters, and maybe that draws the crowd a little bit. But I do think there's a way to put this puzzle together to have a bit more consistent big time basketball events in downtown Buffalo. And I think if you ask some people, they'd probably rather go to a Syracuse Buffalo exhibition game than Buffalo Canisius regular season game at the arena, when those two teams can play each other in their home floors on balance, especially with the uniqueness that Syracuse hasn't played here since they were in the NCAA tournament. I believe that was 2011, might have been back in 2014.
Syracuse can't be so uppity anymore, like it probably could have been a few years ago, right?
I think Syracuse is interested in playing here because of the potential that they could maybe return here in the NCAA tournament. And that's why they played here in previous years at some times. Now, Syracuse, as you said, isn't guaranteed, and they were never guaranteed, but Syracuse isn't as likely to be a top 4 seed that would get to preferential seeding in Buffalo as they used to be. But maybe they're hoping they are, or maybe they're just thinking they could get lucky and sent to Buffalo. And I think that's part of the reason why they're playing this exhibition game here, but decided to do it as the exhibition game and not give up one of their actual home games that might, count against their record and things like that. But so I think for the basketball fans, maybe it's a plus that you're getting Syracuse here in an exhibition game instead of the Big Four doubleheader that's been done many times and doesn't always get a big crowd. But I think the fact that it's going backwards, instead of getting more basketball events or more consistency to the basketball events, it seems like we're getting less, and not the one that you could usually count on, that at least during an NCAA tournament year, you'll see some sort of regular season doubleheader earlier in the year.
Do you think this could be something that opens the door to regular season UB Syracuse games? Probably not in Alumni Arena, but in Syracuse, and maybe that's the trade-off Syracuse is willing to make. We're not going to go play. We're not going to lose a easy game by going and playing on the road in our non-conference schedule, but we'll go play the exhibition, and then you can come play here every so often.
Well, UB's been playing there every few years already, so I think each schedule deal is done.
But that's that's a hit, and that's like a scattershot thing, though, right? It's not a regular series.
No, right. And this isn't a home and home, so I don't think it's tied to. It could be in a new contract. UB could be going back there. So yeah, maybe there might be a 1-for-2 or a home and home element to this deal. But I kind of think this is Syracuse wanting to play in Buffalo. Sometimes they recruit here. They have fans in this part of the state, and the potential to play on this floor before the NCAA tournament, I think, is attractive to them. And there's been changes over the last 4 or 5 years of allowing Division I teams to play these public exhibition games. Sometimes they're charity games. And I think that's really been the big change, that this opens up a scheduling opportunity for Syracuse to play here without giving up one of their non-conference home games that they make a lot of money on. maybe they don't draw the same crowds for exhibition games at the Dome than they do for regular season games. I guess it's probably not during a student break week, but that could play into some of the calculus for Syracuse. But yeah, I think it's just good that they're playing here in general because they haven't played a regular season game here, I think, since 2007 or 2006. And it had just seemed to be that the amount of money they make selling tickets at the Dome was more than they could get paid to play here. And they just didn't have the motivation. There were years when the NCAA tournament was here and Syracuse was the #1 seed and sent here where they didn't feel it was necessary to play a game in Buffalo earlier in the season. So having Syracuse back in that mindset of wanting to play in Buffalo sometimes is a good thing.
Yeah, and I think it's a good thing for the alumni because there are a lot of Syracuse alumni, and you could promote it, right, as just outreach to your Buffalo-based Syracuse alums to come see the game and, ticket break, or if with your alumni ID or whatever, you could do all kinds of little packages and things, right?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think if this is more regular, I don't know if you're going to see Syracuse playing an exhibition game here every year.
Penn State does
but
things like that. I mean, where they go around to the different towns where they recruit. It's also good for your recruiting for the high school kids coming out that might want to consider going to Syracuse or Penn State or those types of. But Buffalo, anyways, I digress.
Yeah, and I mean, I think it shows that Syracuse has some motivation to play in Buffalo during NCAA tournament years or at some sort of interval. And I think that opens up the door to, maybe having them play a regular season game here in 4 years or whenever the NCAA tournament comes back, or if they ever are able to launch some kind of multi-team event, having Syracuse involved because, they're going to draw some fans and Syracuse might like that, playing what would be count as a road game, even though it's not too far from their home base. And also, if they ever were to revive the idea of playing the TBT in Buffalo, I don't know if it would be at the arena, but maybe you play a night or two there or a game or two there on one night. That Syracuse alumni team, which has a former UB player, Nick Perkins, playing for them this summer, a former Bonaventure player, Charles Pride, playing for them this summer. But if you did have the TBT in Buffalo, I think you try to make sure to get that Boeheim's Army team in that regional, and you'd pull in some Syracuse fans, and you'd see, some of that same motivation for Syracuse playing a game here with its own team would extend to, doing that with the alumni team. And so, Syracuse isn't that far. And I think, as we mentioned in the last podcast about a little bit of like, hey, maybe you can make some trades and you can send a Bills game to Toronto, even though it doesn't work exactly like this, and you get back basketball game, baseball game, soccer game. Maybe there's some way to work some different deals if the Bills do some kind of promotion or deal in Syracuse where they have some popularity, and you get back some college basketball events involving Syracuse University, or maybe there's a way to combine this with football scheduling and you get Syracuse to play UB football in some way. That's a win for the fan base if it leads to one thing leads to the other.
You mentioned TBT, and we talk about it every summer on this podcast. And obviously, UB has had a lot of success in the past, and then the team eroded, crumbled, whatever. I mean, it doesn't exist anymore. Has there been any movement on that? And we've talked on this podcast before about the problems with the arena, and it doesn't have air conditioning, and holding the event, and losing the coach and all that type of thing. But it was it had such traction, and then it just disappeared. Is there any talk of bringing it back, or any of those players doing anything, or what?
There's been no movement in that direction. I mean, you got the Buffalo players, not all of them are still in the TBT, but they've scattered around playing for other teams in the TBT. And there's been no talk that they'd come back together and put that blue collar U team back together again. In fact, I think some of the blue collar U support behind the scenes got pushed into Boeheim's Army a little bit. So no. Now, CJ Massenberg and Nick Perkins and Brock Bertram, who wasn't on the TBT team, he's a former UB player, were running a camp in Western New York. It would have been this past weekend. It got postponed. I don't know why, but these players do come back to Buffalo and have some motivation to get back together and still be involved. So I do think that TBT team could be put back together. But Brian Hodgson was very involved with that. He's busier and busier, and he wasn't a head coach when they put that together. Now he's a head coach down at South Florida, now Arkansas State before that, has recently married and a young child. So I think that's a roadblock to putting the TBT team back together the way that it was. Those players are getting a bit older. You're going to have to dip into some more recent alumni, and UB hasn't been as good in recent years. But I do think if there was a revital and UB not willing to help host that tournament at Alumni Arena killed a lot of the momentum and the motivation and the drive that they had to keep that going.
Do you think they regret that, or because it's a state school and their hands are tied and I'm sorry, that's just the way it is? Or did they look back
I think they should regret it, and I think there's fans and people involved in the TBT team that regret that it didn't happen. I'm not.
They had something going on. They had a cool thing.
I don't think, from what I understand, that the administration regrets that they didn't pull that off. And it could still happen. I think if they did have some regret and they changed their mind and wanted to host next year, I think the players and enough people would get back involved to play the games.
But they wouldn't be as good.
Well, they'd be a little bit older. They might not be as good as far as winning the whole thing. I think they'd be just as good in terms of being able to play in the tournament. I don't think they're too old to put the band back together. And there were a few players that, Ronaldo Segu, Jonathan Williams, who's still in the NBA, which would make him not able to play in the TBT, or he's able to, but NBA players don't play in that. So there was a bit of a generation of players that were too young for the TBT team then and are now able to play in the TBT. So they could still, I think, put together a good enough team. And, as they did before, they can bring in a few ringers that didn't play for Buffalo to fill out that roster. I think there's
Mark Bortz.
Bonaventure has had a team.
Friend of the show, Mark Bortz could play on that team.
He might be a little old, but I think there's.
I was saying that just to say hello to Mark Bortz.
I think the player, okay. Well, hello, Mark Bortz. I think the player participation aspect of it would not be that difficult to put together more than one Western New York based team. And then you could have the Boeheim's Army team and do that. I think you would need the venue. You'd either need UB to want to play ball with the TBT and host. And I think the TBT soured a little bit on UB administration when they didn't want to do that.
Was it the athletics department administration or higher than that?
I think it was the athletic department, but there was a cost to bringing in the temporary air conditioning that might have been higher than the athletics department that wasn't too keen on spending that money. But from my reporting and my understanding, there were people with the TBT team, Blue Collar U, willing to help put some money into closing that gap and bringing in the air conditioning, and athletics just didn't really want to do it. And I don't think they've changed their position on that, but maybe there's a way. I think there's a way to host a TBT regional in Buffalo without doing it at UB. I think you play one night at the arena involving the UB team, the Bonner team, the Boeheim team. You put a lot of energy into trying to draw 10, 12,000, which is a big crowd for TBT games, to that event. And you play the rest of the games that won't draw as well over at ECC. And you put it together with a multi venue type thing in Buffalo. There was some appetite from the TBT when they wanted to play here to play some outdoor games at Riverworks. The Buffalo team didn't want to play on the outdoor courts, but maybe you get some of the other teams involved to play a little bit there, and you do a combination event. But I think that would take the arena stepping in and saying, we want more basketball programming, and we think this TBT event is one of the things we can do to bring more basketball to downtown Buffalo.
Yeah, it seems like there just hasn't been much movement there, which is disappointing. And there hasn't been for you. It's not like it's the current administration. It's been that way for how long? 10 years, more than that
Yeah.
for basketball programming anyway.
It's too bad also that there wasn't a arena game during the years that UB was ranked in the top 25 and with NATO's coaching and going to the NCAA tournament, because I think some of those games could have drawn really big crowds, and Bana was good in those seasons. UB Bana could have drawn a pretty big crowd to playing in the arena, but it didn't happen during the years when NATO was the coach. And then the following year, NATO is gone and the team wasn't as good, and there wasn't as much of an appetite to have that UB Bana game at the arena and see how many people you could pack in for that.
Anything else we need to get to, Jonah, before Florina Altshiler joins us?
Well, let me just answer the question you asked before about the Sabres. I think you were saying that maybe the schedule release was the most exciting part of the offseason.
Well, tongue in cheek.
Tongue in cheek. Yeah, and I get that because the Sabres haven't done a lot. It's been a bit of a ho-hum offseason, but I don't know if I'd agree. And I think it's been interesting, this Bowen Byram saga, even though it doesn't end up with much different than, a player who was on the Sabres still being on the Sabres. But it went from, you start with the JJ Peterka trade, and then the belief that Bowen Byram would be next. And some people had put out there or assumed that he didn't want to be here. JJ Peterka didn't want to be here. But as it turns out, maybe Bowen Byram wasn't resistant to playing here. He just wanted a fair contractor to get as much money as he could, and probably wants some more power play time than the Sabres have given him in the past, but was willing to sign for 2 years at $6.25 million, which seems like a pretty good deal. It's less than what Owen Power is making. And it went from Bowen Byram doesn't want to be here, the Sabres are going to trade him, to the Sabres are going to get offer sheeted and they aren't going to match. Oh, wait, they are going to match. Well, that would be stupid. To why hasn't Kevin Adams made this trade yet? He's not getting the deal done. This is a failed offseason because the Sabres didn't replace JJ Peterka with whoever player they're trading Bowen Byram for. So now, I think this was a pretty good bit of business the Sabres did getting Bowen Byram signed. They have a pretty solid defense core right now with 3 really good offensive defensemen, and hopefully Michael Kesselring can bring what they need defensively and make that group better as a whole. And you still can possibly trade Bowen Byram during the season at the deadline next offseason. And I don't think the Sabres got a lot better this offseason, but I'm not sure they got any worse. And I don't think there should be too much doom and gloom about the Sabres offseason. It's just,
but they needed to get a lot better. They needed,
well,
they didn't get worse.
Yes.
I mean, that is
right.
So that's really bad that they didn't get. The thing should be that they've made obvious improvements. And I used the phrase at the last podcast, rearranging the chairs, deck chairs on the Titanic, because yes, they got better on the blue line, but at the expense of weakening their forwards, and they've done really not much at goaltender.
Right. But it's what they needed to do was probably trade a little bit of offense for a little bit of defense and get a little older and get a little tougher, and get a little more responsible. And
I think it wears the fans out. The frustration comes from, it's not a team that needs tweaking. And they have approached this team as though that's all it needs is just a little adjustment. Last year it was the fourth line, or let's get our bottom 6. Let's really improve our bottom 6 forwards. And it did nothing. And many of those guys are gone already. And now it's like, well, if we just tweak the defense. So yeah, I think it's, the skepticism is justified. And I think that but I get what you're saying, Jonah, is I think that the fans and media too are so desperate for something drastic to happen that if something drastic doesn't happen, then nothing has happened. And is that correct? No, it's not. I mean, there's some, there are some tangible differences on this team. They have made improve, like you say, a little, given up some offense for better defense. So yeah, but it just doesn't seem that that's going to work. And with the track record of this team for the last 14 years, and this general manager for the last, is it 5 or 6? Going into his 6th?
I think 5 going into 6, yeah.
Yeah. So anyways,
I just I just think specific to this Bowen Byram situation, there were a lot of people sitting there waiting to dunk on Kevin Adams over Bowen Byram and how it was handled. And as it turns out, seems like they handled it pretty well and I don't know, came out ahead, but they traded Casey Middlestad for Bo Byram and they were able to re-sign Bo Byram, and I think he fits a little better than Casey Middlestad. So I think they're ahead in that transaction, at least for these 2 years. And then he goes into unrestricted free agency, and maybe you don't have him then. And we'll see if the Sabres figure out a way to trade him before that or sign him to a long-term extension before that. 2 years from now, it could look like maybe they didn't handle this well if he walks and they never traded him. And then I think as far as the Sabres getting better, what they really need is that Josh Norris trade to work out. If he's better than Dylan Cousins and he stays healthy, they gave up a second-round pick in that deal with the assumption that Josh Norris is better than Dylan Cousins, or at least better for them than Dylan Cousins. That's where the Sabres can be a better team next year, is if he's better and more consistent and reliable than Dylan Cousins was a year ago.
Right. Well, it's maybe one more reason why hockey needs a break. It's just why the schedule really. Let's just get it over everything. Let's dump everything like you do right after the Stanley Cup is raised. Gary Bettman hands the Stanley Cup to the captain of the winning team, and then here comes the puke of the NHL offseason. It just all comes up projectile style. All right, and let's just get it all over with. Unplug and start thinking about hockey after this break, which doesn't, it's just, it's the shame that the NHL, like you say, can't get any kind of off-season momentum. Not momentum's not the right word, but just to be able to generate any kind of interest at this time, whether it be the schedule, it all happens too quick. It's all smashed together, all in one big heave. Before the NFL training camps open. Jonah, thanks for this. We're going to take a break. And on the other side, we are going to talk to Florina Altshiler. She's a partner at Russo and Gould. And she is a former state of Alaska sex crimes prosecutor. She's been on the show before. And we're going to talk about the Maxwell Hairston situation.
The financial needs of a business go beyond tax and attest services. That's why CTBK goes beyond accounting services and offers outsourced solutions through their affiliation with CFO Solutions Plus. These additional services allow clients to focus on their operational and long-term strategic goals. Trust CTBK's outsourced solutions to provide cost-effective, value-added financial services tailored to your company's needs. Call CTBK at 716-630-2400. Again, 716-630-2400, or go to ctbk.com to learn more about CTBK's outsourced solutions.
Welcome back to Tim Graham and Friends, brought to you by CTBK, CPAs and business consultants. Joined now, as promised, by Florina Altshiler. She's a partner at Russo and Gould, based here wait a minute. You're based in Buffalo, but you spent so much time in New York City. I guess I shouldn't assume. Where are you based these days?
I am based in Buffalo. Our main office is in New York City.
Right. Okay. But I think you did the podcast one time and you were in New York City at the time.
I was just in New York City on a rape trial for 3 weeks. So I'm in New York City quite a bit.
Okay. Well, I just wanted to, for the record, you are local. You used to be as far away from local as possible. You were in Alaska as a prosecutor, and you handled a lot of sex crimes, high profile things. And you've been so insightful in the past for us when it comes to delicate issues, because you've dealt with them as the hallmark of your career, I believe, dealing with delicate cases. So your insight is always valuable here. Why did you want to pursue this type of law? And I'm talking about you're a prosecutor, you're a defense attorney now, it should be noted, but why were you compelled to follow very traumatic and very troubling? I mean, I don't want to put words in there, but I'll let you speak. But I mean, I know a lot of people who get into law and they wouldn't want to be anywhere near this.
So initially, prosecution work, and particularly sex crimes, spoke to me because they're particularly sensitive cases where the effect on the victim is significant, well beyond that of, let's say, a physical injury that you can heal from and move on from, right? The emotional trauma that stays with a person as a result of a sexual assault is significant. And so I was drawn to that because I thought that it's an area that I could make a difference in and profoundly help people maybe shorten the span of that trauma by seeking justice, by getting a just result, by getting some closure. But in working for the prosecution and in working on those types of cases, I realized that the world really is not that black and white. And these accusations in particular are not that clear. It's not like a homicide case where I would simply follow the science, follow the DNA, follow the ballistics. And usually you can piece that puzzle together to a pretty clear answer, and to a suspect and to a conviction. But sex crimes are very frequently, if not always, something that happens between two people behind closed doors with no other witnesses and often not much evidence. DNA never answers the question of consent. So even when there's DNA, it simply tells us that two people had sex, but we still don't know the answer of whether or not that makes it a crime. We don't know whether or not it was consensual. And so sex crimes are such a gray area, and the potential penalties and punishment of imprisonment and lengthy prison sentences, it's significant. Oftentimes I would see defendants without criminal histories, oftentimes young people, college students, people that are sometimes well into their professional careers, not somebody that you would typically think of as a criminal, and certainly not career criminals. And they were looking at double-digit state prison sentences, and that's heavy. That's heavy if the person is innocent. That's heavy if it's a false accusation. That's heavy if it's a misperception of the situation. And so I came into it as a prosecutor thinking that absolutely, if somebody reports a sex crime, why would they lie? Obviously, it must have happened, and I want to help that person. And as I dug deeper and deeper into these cases, into prosecuting these cases, I started feeling bad for the defendants. And I started wondering, well, what if I don't have it right? What if I'm doing such a good job convincing a jury to convict that I'm actually leading the way for an injustice by convicting somebody who's innocent? And certainly it's the job of the defense attorney to raise enough doubt to prevent that conviction, but you just never know. And I think eventually I came to the conclusion that mistakes are going to be made in the criminal justice system. Our system is not perfect. And there's two options for mistakes. One option is to let guilty people go free. The other option is to have innocent people sit in prison. But if you accept that the system is not perfect, you have to accept that there's going to be errors. And the side you choose to be on is going to be the side that the errors are those that you're more comfortable with. And I think the choice I eventually made, now being a criminal defense attorney, is I'm more comfortable with making the mistake of having guilty people go free than being responsible for innocent people sitting in prison. And that's the choice I'm making. And that's why now I'm a defense attorney.
You're originally from Brooklyn, but went to Alaska because to become a prosecutor. And there's a reason why Alaska. Can you explain that?
Sure. So I was an attorney litigating in New York City. And at the time I had always wanted to be a prosecutor. And I was thinking about where would be a good place to prosecute. And I read a New York Times article that at the time cited that the state of Alaska had 4 times the national average of sex crimes. And I was very passionate about helping victims of sex crimes and prosecuting those types of crimes. And I thought there's no better place to go than Alaska because of the sheer volume of sex crimes there. If you're a trauma surgeon, you're going to go to Baltimore, you're going to go to Detroit. If you're here in Buffalo, you want to be at ECMC, right? You want to be where the action is. You want to be where that type of case is. So if you want to prosecute sex crimes, you want to be in an area that unfortunately has a high number of those to prosecute.
If that's the way you're wired, right? Not
Exactly
everybody gets into medicine because they want to work in the ER.
Right.
But you're wired a little different. So we're here to talk about Maxwell Hairston, the Bills' first-round draft pick. He's a cornerback out of the University of Kentucky, and recently he received a civil lawsuit regarding a March 2021 incident at the University of Kentucky in which a woman alleges sexual assault in her University of Kentucky dorm room. She also is filing for intentional infliction of emotional distress. And there are some interesting aspects to this from a factual standpoint. Number one, Maxwell Hairston was 17 years old at the time of this incident, alleged incident, so making him a minor. It was reported to law enforcement, according to the civil suit, within hours. And she did go to the hospital, was examined by a sexual assault nurse with a SANE examination, SANE. It's an acronym. I know there's a lot to unpack there, but it seems to me, on the surface, he was 17 years old. You did not know he was going to become a first-round draft pick at the time that she went to law enforcement. She transferred out before he even played a down of football at the University of Kentucky. This happened in March 2021. So I think that there's a reaction when they see football player being sued to money grab, and that there are some aspects to this that would line up to it being not the most effective long play to hatch a plan in March of 2021 to 4.5 years later looking for a payout. So that lends some credibility. But again, as you mentioned, these aren't black and white. So what is your general overview of just this situation?
So there's different types of claims that people make with regard to sex assault. Sometimes people point blank lie, right? It's a fabrication. It did not happen. They're making it up as a money grab. I'm in no position to suggest that that's the case here. But it doesn't have to be black and white where she's either telling the truth or she's lying. There's this whole other gray area where sometimes people misperceive events. Sometimes they exaggerate events. Sometimes they're consenting in the moment and then the next day feel a lot of regret. And with time, that regret grows, and that regret grows into what they believe to have been a sexual assault when really it wasn't. And then, of course, sometimes people are telling the truth and they were sexually assaulted. And that is a very real possibility as well. And I'm not here to say that she's lying or that she's misperceiving these events or that she's telling the truth. We really don't know. What I can tell you is that there are plenty of sex assault cases that I've handled on both sides of the criminal field. And you just don't know. Sometimes people are under the influence of alcohol. Sometimes they're under the influence of drugs. Sometimes they're saying yes, and then they're blacking out, but they're conscious and they're coherent and they appear to be consenting in the moment. And then the next day they remember nothing. And so there's a lot of area for gray and a lot of room for reporting something that really didn't happen the way that they're believing it happened. I would say this, though, in terms of her reporting this back in 2021, and now he's a first-round draft pick, and she you're saying she couldn't have known this at the time, sure. But he didn't get into football 3 years ago for the first time. You don't become a first round draft pick because you decided as an adult to now start playing football. So in college, he showed promise. And in college, he was already a football player doing well.
Well, in
And
high school, he had just enrolled. So he had only played high school football up until this point.
so this was in Kentucky. I thought that this happened in their dorm room.
That's right. So he was what they have, Florina, in college sports. If you have enough credits in your high school, they will allow you to graduate in December and you can early enroll in your college. And what that does is, especially for football players, it allows you to get into the program and start participating in spring practice. So he's on campus. Yes, he's as a member of the football team, but hasn't played for them yet.
Okay, so
I don't know, that's
knows,
probably not a great distinction, but your
No,
point still stands.
right. It's
He was recruited to play football at the University of Kentucky.
But he's accepted into a college program. He's doing spring training for what will be the college team that he's supposed to be on. She knows this, presumably. Does she see him becoming an NFL player? Maybe, maybe not, but I don't think it's a far stretch that at the time she would have had no way of knowing that he's going to be a first round draft pick. I think that's a very real possibility. I think there's a reason that, guys like high school cheerleaders and girls like high school football player captains. Like there's something attractive about that because there's a promise of a future. People like kids that are in rock bands, people like people with promise. And there's always this pipe dream of you're going to be in the less than 1% that makes it. And I think a lot of times our idealistic young selves believe that that chance is way more than less than 1%. And we see everybody as possibly making it. So I can't say that she didn't see the possibility that he may make it. And I don't think it's fair to say that because she initially reported this 3 years ago, she could have had no way of knowing that this could be a money grab. However, it's certainly different than somebody reporting it now against someone who already made it. And that's definitely, Tim, a great distinction and a point to recognize, but I don't know that it eliminates it completely.
Right, for sure. Oh, absolutely not. And yeah, I don't want to contend that at all. I do want to point to, I have a couple of statements, and these have been on the record before, but just for this podcast, for the to make it comprehensive, and also for Florina's benefit. So here's Brandon Beane, the Bills general manager. He was asked about the allegation was out there back when the Bills drafted him, long before the lawsuit. So a few months ago, Brandon Beane was asked about the allegation against Maxwell Hairston at the University of Kentucky. And here's what Brandon Beane said. He's an impeccable kid, and we did a lot of research. I think all teams were aware of the Title IX thing. That was fully investigated by the school. There's everything out. He even volunteered to a polygraph and had notes. It was one of those where there was zero information saying this actually happened to what the accusation was. Just like anything in this world, you can't just take someone's account and think that's the truth. We fully investigated that. If there was anything to it, he wouldn't have been invited to the NFL scouting combine. He was at the draft last night. Every person you talk to at Kentucky, teammates, staff there, plus what we've done, I would say this is a heck of a young man. And what Brandon Beane's referring to there is the NFL has its own code of conduct, and you can be eliminated from attending the NFL scouting combine if you have problems in your past. They would just say, you're not welcome here. And then they invited him to actually be on site at the draft at Green Bay, to which what he's saying there is the NFL also had done its due diligence. And then here's what a Kentucky spokesperson said when I reached out to UK. This is a quote. This was from a statement. Sexual assault allegations are thoroughly investigated and can involve police, Title IX, student conduct officials, and other legal entities. If and when charges are warranted, or if a student is found to have violated our code of student conduct, such charges and disciplinary measures are filed and pursued aggressively to protect our students. Now, it doesn't say anything specifically regarding Maxwell Hairston, but what it is saying is if there was anything, you would know about it, or we would have done something about it. Now, there's all kinds of stuff there, Florina. I guess ways to go with those two statements. Number one, there's the aspect of we investigated this, we researched it, but we don't really know how they researched it or investigated it, right? That's not a legal entity. You're talking about a football team here, and a football league that does have security people that were former FBI, former Secret Service, former state police. I mean, these people are prominent within former law enforcement before they start working for the National Football League or the Buffalo Bills. And then you have the University of Kentucky, which is saying, hey, we looked into it. So I don't know where we want to go first. I guess let me ask it this way. And we've talked about this with Matt Ariza and Von Miller and other topics here on the show in the past. There also is a belief from the public or from fans or whomever, just the layman, that if no charges were filed, then nothing happened. Now, of course, we talked about the gray area there in the interpretation, but I guess how do you, when you talk about no prosecution versus the credibility of a civil suit, how do you balance, or how do you rationalize that or reconcile that?
Well, and I think that's really what's important, is not the Bills investigation nor the Title IX investigation. I think what's really important here is the local police investigation. If she reported this, and if she reported it promptly, and if she reported it to local law enforcement, or if she went to the hospital and had a rape kit done, then that hospital would have had been mandated to promptly report it to the police. So even if she didn't report it to the police, the hospital would have reported it to the police because they have to, if she went to the hospital timely. So now this begs the question of, if it's reported to the police, why are there no charges? Well, I can tell you why there's no charges, because the local district attorney's office would have made the decision not to prosecute. And for a local district attorney's office to make the decision not to prosecute is very significant. Because generally, when they believe that there's evidence that a crime occurred, they prosecute. And then I'm stuck defending those cases, right? So the district attorney's office is not in the business of dismissing cases. They're in the business of prosecuting cases unless they believe that a crime did not occur. That is the only way that a district attorney's office will say, we're not prosecuting this. If they have reason to believe that a crime occurred and they can prove it, they're going to prosecute it. They're not in bed with the defendant. They're not trying to help some potential defendant. Their job is to bring justice. Their job is to prosecute crimes when they believe there's evidence that the crime occurred. So what I suspect happened in this case is, whether it's from an interview with her or multiple interviews with her, something came out that made them believe that she is not to be believed. And so they drew the conclusion that there's not sufficient evidence that this was something that was not consensual. And they decided not to prosecute it. Now, a Title IX investigation, totally different standard and not as involved as what law enforcement normally does to investigate, and way less resources. So we don't know what happened with the Title IX investigation. We don't have any reason to believe that there were any adverse findings against Hairston. And even if there were, it's a very different burden and a very different standard. And then in terms of the Bills investigation, again, different standard. They're investigating it now 3 years later, or, a few months ago, whenever they first invited him. It's not back in 2021. Evidence disappears, witnesses disappears. You're not going to have the same access to information as back then. So I think the key here, her lawyers for the civil case for money damages, to argue for her to recover money, are going to say, she reported this promptly. Okay, yes, great. But on the flip side, she reported this promptly and it was investigated promptly and no charges were filed. Why? Why did the police not pursue this?
Could that be as simple as, I don't want to say simple, that's a loaded word, but could it be, we can't convict this case Because as you mentioned at the very beginning, things happen behind closed doors between two people, and maybe something happened, maybe something did happen, and she is telling the truth, but we can't convict this case.
Pretty much every sex assault case is two people behind closed doors.
Yeah.
And it's the word of the complainant that's the determinant factor. And so if we believe her, we can convict him. If we have reason not to believe her, then we can't, right? Sometimes the DNA excludes the person. Sometimes there's a mixed sample of DNA from multiple people, which raises questions. Sometimes the toxicology report will show that the person was under the influence of all sorts of drugs at the time, right? So maybe the complainant comes to the DA's office, says, I didn't take any drugs, I was totally sober. And then the hospital toxicology shows that they're on cocaine and methamphetamine. Well, that's an important inconsistency and an important fact to consider. Sometimes they'll say I was roofied, and then the drug facilitated sex assault exam shows no roofies in the system, and it's done timely within a certain number of hours, where you would think based on the half-life it would show. So there are times where the objective scientific evidence or objective medical evidence disputes what the complainant is saying. And when those questions are raised, and sometimes they're raised with the complainant, sometimes they tell a different story. Sometimes they admit to prior inconsistencies. Sometimes they recant and take back the story. Now, certainly here she's interested in pursuing it in a civil lawsuit that comes almost 4 years later, conveniently timed just as he's selected as the first round draft pick. That's interesting. Is there money to be had from him? And is it being filed now that there's a recognition that there's money to be had? That's certainly something that I would consider. And I don't think we can discount it.
As far as this civil case, what kind of challenges might there be with evidence, that things that could have been available 4 years ago that might not be available now, or is there ways to come up with evidence retroactively? You know, how might that play out?
So if she went to the hospital timely, the medical records are preserved and they would have access to those medical records. If she had a rape kit done, that would be preserved. It may have been tested back then, or it was preserved and never tested, but it can be tested now, so long as it's preserved. So that evidence is fine. In terms of witnesses, who saw them maybe before the encounter, maybe right after the encounter, maybe someone saw him going in, someone saw him going out. Did she tell anybody that this happened? Who was the first person she told that this happened to, and when, right? Where are those people? And really importantly, what do they now, 4 years later, remember, and how well do they remember it? Obviously, if somebody spoke to them, you know, the same day or within a week, they would remember things with a lot more clarity than they do now 4 years later. And so I think there's a lot more room for them to misremember what they think they remember, not because they're lying, but just from the passage of time. I've had a lot of cases where when they're reported promptly, we have access to surveillance video, right? We have video from outside the bar, video from people getting into an Uber, video from the building lobby. Everybody has cameras now everywhere. There's ring door cameras, there's street cameras, there's closed circuit TV by municipalities. Colleges have videos everywhere. But those videos are not preserved for 4 years unless it's specifically requested that they be preserved. So if they were not requested back when this was reported and investigated, and if they were not then preserved, it's really difficult to get that now. Chances are it's been erased and it's been rewritten over. Now, this isn't a crime that's alleged to have happened somewhere outside on video, but the video will show potentially the before and the after, and that's really important. You know, is she running out crying? Is she walking out casually? Are they walking out together and making out? Are they walking in together? Are they walking in together holding hands? Does he go in maybe 10 minutes after? Does he force his way into the dorm, or is she holding the door open for him, welcoming him in? Those are important things that aren't determinative of whether or not a sex assault occurred, because certainly somebody can consent to 9 different things, but then say no to the 10th thing. However, it may contradict whatever version she's giving, right? If she's saying he just showed up in my dorm uninvited, but then there's video of them walking into the building together holding hands, that's a very different picture and certainly suggests he was very much invited into that dorm. And we don't know. We don't know what video exists. We don't know whether it was preserved, but it's always helpful to both sides. It's helpful to support the claims she's making for her to have those videos, and it's helpful to the defense to be able to argue against claims being asserted by having other evidence to suggest that maybe there's inconsistencies.
And how much different might the burden of proof be? Is it possible that the prosecutor didn't find enough evidence to prosecute, but in this civil case that there is enough evidence, or the equation is different?
That's a great question, Jonah. So of course, yes, it is different. In a criminal case, it has to be proof beyond a reasonable doubt. And the reason for that is because the person who's accused is looking at a prison sentence. We're taking away their liberty. We're putting them in prison for a very long time. So the burden of proof is beyond a reasonable doubt. That is a high burden. In a civil case, prison is never a possibility. The only possible penalty is money. The person will have to pay money. The person filing the civil lawsuit is looking to be paid money. A civil suit is unquestionably always about money. It's a question of how much money can we recover as a result of making this claim. And so our system of law functions a little bit differently when it comes to money versus prison. And our system of law has a lower burden of proof for a civil case. In a civil case, the burden of proof is simply by a preponderance of the evidence, which means more likely than not, which, excuse me, also means 51%. So just a little bit more. If we were weighing scales, put an extra penny on one scale and tip that scale to more likely than not. It is a lower burden, but that burden is still with the accuser, and that burden is still to prove that it is more likely than not that this occurred. Yes, it's easier than in a criminal case, but there still has to be proof. It still has to be more likely than not. And a jury ultimately has to believe that this happened.
I have a copy of the complaint, and just to your point earlier about who she told first, it was a friend, according to the complaint. The friend then convinced her to go to the police. So not a firsthand witness, but obviously a person involved that would be germane to this. The complaint also mentions not just the sexual assault allegation, but the intentional infliction of emotional distress. Now, of course, that is a vague term with specifics attached to the complaint, of course, as to how this was conducted or alleged to have been conducted. What is intentional infliction of emotional distress as it would apply to a civil suit?
So anytime somebody causes either physical injury or some sort of trauma to somebody. So here we're talking about a sex assault, but we're talking about the allegation being that he, without consent or with force, penetrated her or had sex with her without her permission, essentially. That can also cause emotional distress for very obvious reasons. And so the claim of intentional infliction of emotional distress is kind of a catch-all additional claim that would apply whether you punch somebody in the face or you rape them, essentially. And it's for the pain and suffering that she would have endured as a result of being forced to have sex with him.
Well, Florina, I appreciate you walking us through this. Is there anything that we didn't ask you about that you think is important to note regarding Maxwell Hairston's the civil suit that's against him?
So I think what's interesting that we haven't talked about, and Tim, you actually had me on the Matt Ariza case a while ago. And what's interesting here, if we compare and contrast it, is, Matt Ariza was a very promising young man. He was a punter for the Bills, and he had sex assault claims filed against him, civil lawsuit, that really went nowhere criminally. They were investigated in California. There were no criminal charges ever filed, but he was released from his contract with the Bills. And the reason he was released from his contract with the Bills is because the Bills took the position that the mere fact that a civil lawsuit is filed, that's a distraction. And that distraction means they can release him. And they did. And we see now, quite a bit of time has passed, how that played out. His career is undeniably affected, for the worse, obviously, simply because an accusation was made and a civil lawsuit was filed. And so sometimes I think the process is the punishment, and the end result, even if you're able to not have criminal charges filed against you, or God forbid criminal charges are filed, but you're ultimately found not guilty, or there's a civil lawsuit and eventually maybe the civil lawsuit is settled, or a jury finds you not responsible, your life is curtailed. Your life is on pause. And these young men have a short window of time when they show promise and when they are elite athletes to succeed. And that is undeniably immediately taken away from them. And they really cannot get that back, especially when they lose years of time. Hairston is interestingly in a different position. Notably, the Bills are not releasing him. They are standing behind him, they're supporting him, and they're not taking the position, well, a civil lawsuit's been filed, and like with Matt Ariza, that's a distraction, so therefore we're going to release you. I find that interesting. I think it's not fair. I'm not here to advocate that Hairston should be released. I'm saying quite the opposite. I think that Matt Ariza was treated unfairly, and he shouldn't have been released from his contract, because that's a harm that he suffered that can never be made whole again. It's not something that could be undone. He can't get that time back, and his career essentially, I think, is over. And Hairston is in a very different situation. He gets to stay, but the same exact thing is happening. There's a civil lawsuit filed.
Yeah, that lends itself to the positions that they play, where they were drafted. Matt Ariza was a mid-round draft pick. Maxwell Hairston was the first pick that the Bills got this year. They the 30th overall, but still a first-round pick. He is going to be a starter for them. Matt Ariza played a position that's considered disposable. Punters are marginal of significance when it comes to, especially a team like the Bills that doesn't punt much. But then there was the other extenuating circumstances of the Bills were embarking. Well, two extenuating circumstances. Number one, the Bills were blindsided by it. Whereas it seems as though they were prepared for Maxwell Hairston and had done some in their investigation, according to Brandon Beane. Whereas the Matt Ariza situation was out of nowhere right before the season began. They were the favorites to win the Super Bowl that year from a betting standpoint. And here you have somebody who might be guilty, might not be guilty. They couldn't afford to stand by him in case, because what if they're wrong? And the storm, and it's a guy who just joined the team. We don't have allegiance. He hasn't really ingratiated himself. And, we don't know this. Like, he's not our buddy yet. There's that fraternal aspect of it too. So yeah, there are differences. But I will say, Florina, that I do get a very strong sense from the Bills as an organization that they regret how the Matt Ariza situation played out. And I think they lean way more heavily towards defending their people or their players than they would trying to play down the middle or for public relations purposes, because they feel upset by the fact that those charges were dismissed, or I guess not, however it went. It's a little, but he was shown not to have committed this. He wasn't involved in the gang rape, or however it fleshed out. That they now are compensating by standing by Von Miller and saying he didn't do anything wrong. And then lo and behold, the NFL suspended him anyway. So the NFL did find that Von Miller had done something worthy of suspension, and then the Bills standing by Hairston here again. I'm not saying that's right or wrong, but I think that and again, it's a discussion to go on. The female owner is no longer a part of the team anymore. I'm not saying that that's necessarily a direct impact on how their organizational thought is, but they seem to be leaning more towards, hey, we're going to believe our guys until shown otherwise, as opposed to making the move for PR reasons. But that would have been a massive distraction because we didn't know for a long time that he was cleared. And again, the process was punishing him and was, by extension, punishing the entire Bills organization because they had to cut a guy that they wanted to keep.
Gable Steveson as well. They ended up cutting him for football reasons, but stuck by him and believed his story.
That's right. Yeah, Gable Steveson. They were upset with they are upset when asked about players who have allegations against them. They bristle at this now that they would even be asked about these things. But you're right, Florina. Absolutely. Regarding, it is similar, but the players, unfortunately, if Matt Ariza was a cornerback or a running back or a wide receiver, maybe they stick with him. But a punter,
I think that's a harsh reality, and
yeah.
Laws and rules should apply equally, but they clearly don't, and that's what's not fair. And it's a bell that cannot be unrung. Because once somebody makes an allegation like this is a serious allegation. Even if the person on the other end of that allegation isn't going to prison, their life is on hold. Whether they get expelled or suspended from whatever academic institution, or their sports career is on pause, or they get released from whatever label they're signed with, or if they're in the, film industry, they get blacklisted. These are serious claims, serious allegations with very serious consequences to people's lives, to their livelihoods, to their careers, to their reputation. And it's not something that you can just take back. It's not time that you can get back. And a lot of times I think people act emotionally and impulsively, and they make these allegations and they don't really think about what impact it's going to have on the accused. And again, I am not saying that anyone making a sex assault claim is lying or that these are all false claims. There's plenty of people who are assaulted sexually, who come forward and have the courage to come forward, and they're making honest and truthful, valid claims. And the people who exaggerate or make false claims are really hurting, not just the people they're making those false claims against, but the tens of thousands of people who come forward every year who are making valid, honest claims, because now everything is gray and we don't know who to believe. We don't know which claims are valid, which claims are not. And oftentimes that process of figuring out which claims are or are not real takes time. And in that time, the accused loses their livelihood.
How much should the Bills be able to trust that the Lexington police and the University of Kentucky investigated this properly, and that, how fair is it to think the Bills need to reinvestigate it 4 years later beyond that?
Let me add a thing on, just related to that. Yeah, obviously it's the Lexington police or the state police or whomever investigated it, and a college. So it's a major university. It's not like, it's not the University of Phoenix or, Podunk U. It is University of Kentucky, massive. But is there a risk or a chance that something comes out in the civil aspect of it that ends up in court or in testimony that either wasn't uncovered or got overlooked? I mean, I guess that's just my
I don't think there's
version
a
of the
risk
same
or a
question.
chance. I think it's guaranteed that information is going to come out that people did not earlier discover. I can tell you with absolute certainty, whether we're looking at the actions of state troopers or local police, whether we're looking at the NYPD in New York City or at the Anchorage Police Department in Alaska. In my experience, all law enforcement fails to do their job. There's shortcomings with their investigations. That is 100%. Their resources are limited, their time is limited, their caseloads are heavy. They don't have the time to thoroughly investigate it. But I will tell you this, when they make an error, that error is to arrest somebody. That error is never to say there's not enough evidence and we're not pursuing the case. Their investigations are generally flawed because they don't interview enough witnesses, they don't collect enough evidence, but they usually go on the word of the accuser and they arrest the person who's accused. Here we have the opposite.
I'll push back on that a little bit, though, especially in a college town where college sports are the thing. It is pretty common over the course of sports history. I mean, we can pull out all kinds of things where the police look the other way when it comes to the player on the team. You know, the athletics department can get, I'm not calling University of Kentucky dirty, but it happens all the time where, this guy, he's with UK, he's a wildcat. We're going to turn him over to the school and let the school handle it, type thing.
Does it happen? Maybe, but I think we've also had quite a few cases where people were arrested that were athletics related, where it was just completely fabricated cases.
Right. Oh, I agree. I just wanted to say it. I think that in public, like, I think it's different when you get into these different, like, as you were saying, in the real world, I would agree with you, but college sports is so wacky and kooky that it's not the real world. Sometimes you have a cop who is a season ticket holder, or, I mean, you'd have it with the Bills or anything else, but you know, I'm not saying that. I was just wanted to make a point regarding your sentiment that I think when it comes to college sports, there's a stigma that maybe they help out the school before the other.
You know, would they maybe help out the school to process this a little bit more cautiously, to take a little bit more time and maybe question more people? Maybe. I have a hard time believing that there's a widespread conspiracy that when an allegation is made against a college player, that it's swept under the rug and we're going to pretend that it never happened. I just don't think that's the case. I think maybe they'll be more cautious before going ahead and pressing charges. And these are serious and significant charges to press. And maybe they want to question the friend that she says she told. Maybe they want to look at video from campus to see if it matches what she's seeing happening, right? And that's what they should be doing in every case, really. So if they're doing it in a college case, and that's an extra step to help the college, I don't see it as an extra step. I see it as this is something they should be doing holistically in every case. And I think it's unfortunate that they don't do it in a lot of cases. I think generally law enforcement rushes to judgment. They don't thoroughly investigate, but their error is they make arrests and they can't unring that bell. Mm-hmm. And it takes a while for the case to process through the criminal justice system to eventually either be dismissed or for somebody to be found not guilty. So it's really telling that here an arrest was not made.
I want to circle back because I don't know that we maybe addressed this as much as we did. The dynamic that he was 17 and she presumably, because she was already enrolled, unless she got in early because she graduated high school early, she would have been at least 18. So the fact that he's a minor, how does that affect the investigation and how maybe it might have unfolded because he's only 17?
So he's a minor, but he's also not a minor. It depends on Kentucky law. There's
insert your joke here about Kentucky.
So there's ages that will make somebody an adult clearly. So over 18, you're going to be charged as an adult because you are an adult under the law for purposes of crimes, pretty much in every state. When you're under the age of 18, it depends on what the crime is, and you can still be charged as an adult. So murder, for example, you can be 16 in New York and you'll be charged as an adult with murder, even though you're only 16. Different crimes have different rules about what age would still make you an adult, even though you're not. I don't know the law in Kentucky, especially when it comes to sex assault, as to whether at 17 he could still be charged as an adult. But I know that there's that area where you still can. So that's one factor to consider. The other way we look at age is age of consent. So whether or not somebody is a victim of a sex crime simply because they're underage. Him being 17 doesn't make him a victim. He would need to be under 16 in Kentucky to then not be of an age to consent, in which case now we're not looking at him as a perpetrator. Just based on age, we would be looking at him as the victim because he's too young. But he's 17. So he's old enough to consent. And I believe that at 17, he could potentially be old enough to be charged as an adult, depending on what the charge is. If not, if we're looking at him as a juvenile, that's still a crime, and there's still a process for juvenile crimes. It doesn't mean if he's under the age of being an adult that there is no crime or that he couldn't be prosecuted. He absolutely could. It's just a different system, and it would be under the family court system.
And then, of course, you're not an expert on the NFL and the collective bargaining agreement. So that's a whole different thing that Bills fans probably are mostly concerned with as to whether or not he gets suspended, because the NFL collective bargaining agreement does allow retroactive incidents as long as, things that have happened in your past. It didn't used to, but the collective bargaining agreement does now, in terms of whether the NFL decides to suspend him or punish him in some way. That's a whole other thing that we won't ask you about because we don't even know. And Jonah and I cover the league. But well, Florina, thank you for this. I always love having you on. You and I are always texting each other looking for an excuse, and we had one. So it's good to have you. I do have a question for you though. In all those things you have behind you, is that a medical model of a shoulder? And
Yes, it is.
what's the purpose of that?
That I'm glad you caught that right in the corner. That's from a trial. So I have different badges from police departments that I've worked with, photos from cases and things. The medical model of a shoulder was a demonstrative exhibit in a trial involving an accident actually at Harbor Center when it was being built, where a construction worker had rebar fall on his shoulder and claimed rotator cuff injuries. And we used that model in the trial.
I see. All right, good. I just wanted to make sure you're doing okay, that maybe you didn't need to have that on hand to explain when people sit in your office why you can't lift your arm.
No, definitely not. Well, thank you so much for having me on. It's always a pleasure. And I enjoy this work. So I enjoy talking about it.
Thank you, Florina. Thanks for classing up the joint. And thanks to everybody out there for watching and listening. Tim Graham and Friends, brought to you by CTBK, CPAs and Business Consultants.